All right, I guess we'll get started. So welcome back. Today we have Dr. Jerry Wohletz. He is a relatively newly appointed president and CEO of the Charles Stark Draper Laboratory. Jerry's been a longtime supporter of the Beaverworks Summer Institute. He started his career as an aeronautics engineer with McDonnell Douglas. He spent time at AFRL as well as NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center. He later served as director of ALPHATECH, which is an MIT startup company that was later acquired by BAE. Spent some time at BAE in executive leadership roles, including vice president and general manager of Fast Labs, as well as the electronic combat solutions. He holds a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Kansas and a master's degree in aeroastro from MIT and a PhD in estimation and control from MIT. So we're very happy to have him here today. Jerry, thanks so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Jen. It's great to be here. I wish we were all here in person. I believe next year, fingers crossed, everything settles down, and this will be in person again. I'm a huge fan of this program. I consider this the top STEM program in the world. Real quick, Jen, we have representation again worldwide in the program. Great. So I pulled together 5.5 weeks in to my role here at Draper Laboratories as the CEO. So brand new CEO. Never done this before, so it'll be very, very interesting. And good news, this is my first speech as a CEO, so I'm excited to be with this group doing that. So now let me see here. Post some of these comments. All right, so I want to start off this presentation. We're going to use the chat function right out of the gate, and Jen's going to help me here with this. But I'm going to ask the following question to the group here. What is mankind's greatest technical achievement? Question mark. I want to see what comes across the chat line here. Greatest technical achievement.
The internet, the wheel, going to the moon, indoor plumbing, sliced bread, Maxwell's equations, language, electricity, Minecraft, the transistor, AI, communications, agriculture, trains, machine code. They're still rolling in. Language.
Right. Yeah, so the good news is there's no right or wrong answer, but I will tell you that this is a question that has just a tremendous amount. If you Google this or Bing or whatever search engine you use, you will see that there are many, many, many lists out there, and there's even books written on this. There's debates in the newspapers on this, but this one was raised in this. On a majority of those lists out there, in the top 10, if not number one, was our mission to the moon. And what I'll tell you here and provide a little bit of the legacy around that is that Draper was instrumental, right, in our nation's ability to go to the moon and more importantly back. So here's some other areas that were highlighted. Mastering flight, and Draper certainly was not part of the original flight of 1903, but what we see as modern day flight today and the safety around that and really getting to the digital flight controls and what we call by fly-by-wire for those that have, for those that are driving with a car that is now drive-by-wire. Another area, I heard the transistor, right? The notion of integrated electronics, and in this particular case here, if you go back and look at, the moon mission, we had vacuum tubes in large rooms, and the ability to go to a silicon-based processing in that was all invented by Draper. Another area here, vaccines. I didn't hear that on the list. I don't know, Jennifer, if that one came up on the list or not, but that is on a lot of prominent lists, vaccines. And I'll tell a story about vaccines and Draper's role in that. And then finally, and I know this probably didn't make a lot of people's, but this is one of those amazing feats, the ability to, fire off a missile underwater and have that go through the surface of the water and be able to go anywhere in the world, right? And that whole linkage to this, to the nuclear deterrence mission, is also on some of this list. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is that, believe it or not, that Draper has been a pioneer in these technologies that I'm showing you on this slide. So not comprehensive of all the great achievements, but a pioneer of this. So now imagine that your boss comes to you with this crazy idea and says, we're going to go to the moon and back. And they present the following cartoon to you, right? And I want to show you the cartoon that the scientists and engineers had of our mission to the moon. And I know it's old, it's from the early 1960s, but just imagine your boss comes to you in the future with a cartoon like this. So here we go.
The Apollo spacecraft will consist of 3 modules. The command module will carry the 3-man crew together with guidance, communications, and life support systems. The service module will contain propulsion systems for mid-course maneuvers, as well as for entering and escaping the lunar orbit. The lunar excursion module will carry 2 crew members to the surface of the moon, along with scientific instruments, communications, and guidance systems. It also will have a propulsion capability for lunar landing and for return to the orbiting command and service modules. In Project Apollo, Saturn's first stage will provide 7.5 million pounds of thrust from 5 F-1 engines for liftoff and initial powered flight. The second stage will develop 1 million pounds of thrust from 5 J-2 engines to boost the spacecraft almost into Earth orbit. At the proper predetermined time and position in the Earth orbit, the S-4B will be reignited for propelling the spacecraft into a translunar trajectory. A few minutes later, staging will occur. The S-4B will be separated, fairings will be jettisoned, and the lunar excursion module will be repositioned to a nose-to-nose attitude with a command module. Preparatory to acquiring its lunar orbit, the spacecraft will be reoriented for deceleration. 2 members of the crew will transfer to the lunar excursion module through the hatch at the connection point between the 2 vehicles. After preparations are completed, the lunar excursion module will separate from the command and service modules, which will remain in lunar orbit. The lunar excursion module will be properly oriented, and its propulsion system will transfer the vehicle into an elliptical orbit suitable for approaching the lunar surface. The vehicle will be reoriented for landing. Then, through a carefully blended combination of manual control and automatic systems operation, the vehicle will be lowered toward the lunar surface. The crew will fire the lunar launching engine at a precisely determined instant to enter a transfer ellipse calculated to rendezvous with the mothership after traveling part of the way around the moon. After proper orientation, the lunar excursion module will complete the docking maneuver.
All right, that's your cartoon, right? It's not exactly the way it happened, but it's not far off from the way it happened. And Draper's role in that was for the entire system, from the launch at Cape Canaveral to the guidance all the way to the moon, to the lunar lander landing, to the lunar lander then taking off, rendezvousing, and bringing it all the way back to Earth. And so now here's the here's the people, right, and what they did to accomplish that. So as that video highlighted, right, greatest technology achievements are made from real world problems. And that is at the core of what Draper has done essentially since the 1930s. In fact, last week, we signed a contract with NASA that we are going to return to the moon, and Draper, as a prime contractor, will land on the dark side of the moon and bring commercial payloads to the moon for an enduring presence on the moon going forward. So how does an organization since the 1930s continue that, right, to the present day? And this is kind of an important point here for this cohort, is that it really boils down to the teams you build and the culture that you foster. And my next video here, before I get into some of the details of specifically what Draper is doing today, I'm going to, sort of the last historical video here is kind of have the people who have been involved in the space race talk about what the key ingredients were to achieving, what is, again, considered one of mankind's greatest achievements.
Our ships were taking a beating in the Pacific, and Doc realized that the gunners were not leading the target enough. He then told the Navy, "You give me your best gunner, and I'll shoot against him." And he blew the guy away with his device. But he earned his reputation during the war on fire control systems.
Doc Draper really conceived the use of gyroscopes when he did the early fire control system for the Navy during World War II. He had his eye all the time on this idea of inertial guidance, that you would be able to build an inertial guidance system that would be immune to jamming, and it would be very useful in the ICBM program.
They brought together very well-educated, but sometimes different people. And he gave them a long rope, and they'd wiggle around and sniff around here and there until they found something they were comfortable in. And that's what made the lab so great. It was an exciting place to go. We had exciting programs, there's no question.
This is kind of an interesting place, this laboratory. When I first came here, I was basically fresh out of college. There was more excitement here. There was more things going on.
People that were directly under him and the lead people on the Apollo program, like Dr. Batten, Hal Lanning, Milt Tregeser, Alden Hall in the computer world. I mean, those guys were aces, I mean, really top notch. And they attracted good people.
The culture was kind of fluid, and we're pretty free to, work what hours were comfortable for us. Having that fluidity allowed us to be more productive, I think.
Doc used to come down to almost every part of the laboratory. He was involved. You talk to each individual.
He'd come down with his little green visor, and if there was an important job in the lathe, he'd go over, look over the man's shoulder, comment, ask how it was going.
The Apollo program.
Things that work. And it sounds so fundamental, but it actually is very key to why Draper's been successful. And it's a very good legacy to leave behind. We're a very hands-on organization. We build things.
I can't presume to predict what the future is going to hold, but I'm sure it's going to be different from anything we imagined. The human race is certainly going to go out into the stars. I thank you very much.
Okay, I hope that played. I know we had a bit of a hiccup, but did it come back quick? That video talked about multidisciplinary teams. I think the phrase give a lot of rope, right? A lot of autonomy, very flexible, what people, imagine and create. And that, you can't underestimate how important that culture of innovation is to achieve those great breakthroughs. And I just provide a list here of Draper's been doing this for a very, very long time and continues to do it to today. And so I just highlight on the upper right of the chart here, and you see lung-on-chip COVID-19 antivirus. And I imagine that some of you have been impacted, know about COVID-19, right? Probably a pretty big event for you all in your lifetimes. Draper developed the first non-human based test for COVID vaccines. It was a real world problem that was needed because the COVID vaccines were being tested simply on humans, given the urgency. But given that real world need, we are able to replicate human lungs and a variety of different human lungs on essentially computer chips, and therefore automatically test in a very large array different vaccines for whether or not they will be effective, but also the side effects, thus eliminating the risk to human-based testing. Done in 2021. So that legacy of innovation continues to this day. So a little about the laboratory. So 8 locations and growing. The largest location is where I'm sitting today here, right next to the MIT campus. We have about 1,800 employees and growing, and roughly around 700 million in revenue, which is pretty large, for a nonprofit organization, a pretty sizable organization. But then you see here that we have locations that align with where our customers are, from Cape Canaveral to Rocket City and Huntsville, Alabama. Clearly Houston, we've got a problem. Washington Navy Yard, that's where the Strategic Systems Program is for the nuclear ICBM portion of the portfolio, and you kind of get an idea here of who our customers are based upon the locations that we're at. So how about our focus? Draper does a lot of things, but I distill it down to these following 4 categories. First and foremost, strategic systems. As soon as the nation, made a commitment to go down the path of a nuclear deterrent option, Draper was at the center of that and has supported our nation for 65 plus years in this endeavor. Draper to this day is integral to not just the system engineering, the mission know-how, but critical components for this going forward. And as a nation right now, we are recapitalizing that infrastructure that was put in place during the Ronald Reagan era. That's about $2 trillion of investment that our nation is making to ensure that we maintain this deterrence for maintaining our freedom. And Draper's at really the center of those type of investments going forward. In addition to that, you've heard in the news a lot about hypersonics and hypersonic vehicles. Draper, again, really at the center of those investments. Moving to the upper right, I talked to you about we're going back to the moon, and Draper is a prime contractor, and we will ride on a SpaceX vehicle to get to space, and then we will go all the way to the moon and land on the moon, and as well as deliver commercial payloads on the moon for an enduring presence going forward, back to the moon, including the dark side. But in parallel to that, the Dream Chaser will be going to the International Space Station this coming year, and Draper again is integral to the ability for any company to be able to do space missions when it comes to guided navigation and control. Again, leaving a launch pad all the way to recovery back on Earth. I'll come back to biomedical in the lower right side. If you go back to the video about the Apollo program and the need to develop silicon-based processors and computers, I'm on a laptop today that all has its origin back to the Apollo program. Our research into advanced electronics has continued. It is actually a very, very sizable portion of the laboratory today. And it spans areas of not just miniaturization, electromechanical devices within silicon, but also this interesting intersection between rad-hardened products, secure processing, and cyber, all integrated into one. A very unique role here for electronics as it meets to the national security space that we focus on. And then finally, biomedical systems. And this is a rapidly growing area, but if we do hearken back to what we have all gone through and the world has in the last 2 years, the need for biomedical security is an ever increasing area. And this is a very unique field that, takes the, what Draper really knows well, understands the notion of controlling systems and doing that from the rigors of math and the physics, but applying that to the biomedical space. So my next video here will kind of highlight, what we're doing in the biomedical spaces. I see this as a really blossoming area and a new area of research, not just for Draper, but the nation.
Traditionally, cells are cultured in a laboratory in a flat, static environment, and these are very unlike the human body. So as engineers, we were wondering, how can we recreate the signals that happen in the body? And if we are able to model and design that into a microfluidic system, let's say, how does that tissue then respond?
So we spent a lot of time developing a human organ system. So there are living kidney cells, multiple cell types inside a microfluidic system. And then we start to play with the parameters that our system allows us to adjust to make it act just like a kidney.
Something that makes our systems unique is the integration of sensors into the microfluidic channels. You don't have to disturb the tissue to learn about it. You can get signals outside the incubator as they're happening in real time.
We can move from kidney to other different organs and tissue types, which we've done and we're currently doing. This is going to move us towards a therapy that can be tailored for the exact individual.
Great. So now, just to summarize some of the engineering capabilities, and you see it's very, very diverse. And so these would think of these as engineering disciplines within Draper, but you can get the idea of the diversity of science and technology. And therefore, this goes back to that ability and that culture to form those multidisciplinary teams to go solve unique problems, right? Real world problems that, more often than not, no commercial or, government entity is off focusing on. And that's the unique place that Draper offers today. So it ranges, no big surprise, inertial measurement, guidance, exactly, what the prior videos spoke about. But, this notion of physical sensing and timing, and this notion of whether that is at the atomic level or the biological level, right? These are fundamental research areas that provide, tremendous promise to, the world that we all live in. Miniaturization of electronics, RF communications, autonomy, cyber, you'll see the buzzwords of AI, ML, right? All of that is also part of that, but it all links to not just the sake of doing things like that for its sole purpose, but it's really the integration of different engineering capabilities shown here. So a typical project at Draper, essentially takes a subset of these images and blends them together to form that multidisciplinary team to go solve that very unique, challenging problem. And then in doing that, what you see is that it's a laboratory, but it's a laboratory that isn't just simply there for the research for the sake of research, but what what is unique about Draper is that it actually has products, and it has products that it sustains right through the life cycle. And so that ability to go all the way from the idea and research stage to actually prototyping, designing, implementing it, transitioning it over to one of our customers, and then supporting that through the life, that's a pretty unique place that Draper plays. Now, Draper is never going to be a high volume manufacturing facility. You've got other companies, right? That can be the Lockheed Martins of the world, the BAE Systems of the world, you name it, or even Intel or Johnson & Johnson, right? We work with all kinds of different companies. Draper uniquely sits in this world, and in fact, the building that I sit in right now, if you look around it, right, you've certainly got the MIT campus, but you're in a biomedical hotspot of the, one of the many in the world here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You got the defense industrial base, you got the venture capital private equity, you got the, our national security customers that are, United States government, and the list goes on. It's a very unique spot here in this sort of innovation ecosystem, and we therefore are able to play many different roles and interface with a lot of different organizations in unique ways that other companies simply cannot. Which takes me now to sort of the final section here again about, one of the themes here is that at the end of the day, it's all about the people, it's all about the culture. And so the legacy that Doc Draper talked about in the different interviews of people was all about building that cross-functional team. And so this will be my last video, and then a couple of slides, and then I'll take questions from there. But let's take a look at the last video here.
One of the best aspects of coming up to Cambridge is that I could meet with engineers from aerospace to mechanical to systems to testing engineers all in one day by going from 5th floor to 4th floor to 3rd floor to 2nd floor.
What this gives Draper is the unique opportunity to have scientists and engineers working among one another in a highly collaborative, interdisciplinary space. This is something extremely unique and a true asset of Draper, to be able to work among people that are experts in different disciplines and to gain insight and support from those individuals that work among you.
I work for finance, and I actually touch upon many different departments and areas at Draper. Draper has actually set me up for success by providing me with the proper equipment to work remotely. While I'm miles away from the office, working from home, I still feel a part of the Draper community.
All right, and then sort of my final point I'd like to make here is that on this slide here, there are interns in every single one of these pictures. And and then we have this notion of scholars. So internships, certainly college internships, looking for high school, right? I can't confirm 5.5 weeks in that we have it, but my full intention is to do that. So if you've got your math lab skills, if you know how to do Python, right? The idea is to bring you to the laboratory during the summer. Draper scholars, in particular, when I was on campus in the remnants of the instrumentation lab many, many years ago, they were called fellows back then, scholars today, but people came to Draper/MIT. They would get their degree at MIT while working at Draper. And they would sit in the Draper facilities, they would use the facilities, but do their MIT research with their MIT professors, and there was also a research advisor here at MIT. We have relationships with universities all across the country replicating that model, and it's an area of a big focus of my tenure here as the CEO to sort of make sure that this becomes a very fluid environment for both internships and scholarships. So I would ask, I know we've got over 300 people on the line, do keep that in mind, right? This is a great STEM program. We want you to go into, get it, degrees in STEM. But I also say, think of Draper as you're going through that journey and seeing whether or not this would be a good place for you to come and spend a summer, or better yet, spend a career. So with that.
All right, Jerry, thanks so much. That was a great talk. Maybe we can start the questions with Aishwarya. She has a question on some of the human lung replication.
First of all, thank you for talking with us today. I was wondering if you could tell us more about how the human lungs were replicated on computer chips, because it sounds really interesting and novel.
Yeah, so DNA. And so we are able to replicate organs, not just an individual's organs, but more importantly, a representation of a whole collection of human organs. We've done that for lungs. You can actually do that's called organ-on-the-chip technology. And there's many large pharmaceutical companies that are doing that. But what now becomes interesting, instead of all those manual lab trials where you take a DNA sample, a replication of an organ, and you individually, and you see those videos of people putting that, we have in our microfluidics research that then links back to control theory and estimation theory, have brought that amazing biomedical DNA to chemistry, right? Because it has to be stable within the substance, right? And it has to be 3D, as a lung is 3D. And you bring that all together into essentially an array that is, let's say, 16 by 32. And you actually have a control system that is introducing different vaccines. And you're able to real time measure the impact on that, laboratory generated tissue from an organ. That's what Draper has pulled all the way together and did that in the middle of a pandemic. So, I mean, just absolutely, I didn't even know that technology existed until I joined here, but it is absolutely fascinating. Now, where could this go? Ideally, if you go to the airport and you fly, there's some form of screening at the airport. Imagine that there was a non-intrusive way to determine whether or not you inadvertently were carrying a pathogen. Right? These are the type of applications that Draper is researching and seeing what we can do to bring that, again, all around, security and maintaining people's security. Great question.
Okay, Jaden, would you like to ask a question?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I was wondering, and I guess a lot of other people were wondering, what is like Draper like to see in like new hires? Like, what are you guys exactly looking for when you're like hiring different candidates?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we're looking for people who are have a passion around national security and those technologies. We're looking for people who want to go do things that others have never done or attempted. Right? I'll harken back to, again, can you imagine your boss coming to you and with that silly cartoon of how we're going to go to the moon and back, something that no one's ever done, and you're like, yeah, all in, right? That's what we're looking for. So we're looking for people who have that passion, have that curiosity, have that drive to go do things that other people said can't be done. Right? All of the degree, all of the things that you would do, whether you're in science, math, biology, you name it, that's all kind of like a given. We're really looking for the passion in the people to go do the impossible.
That's great. Viplav, would you like to ask your question next?
Yeah. What do you see as the biggest challenges for Draper as the new president and CEO?
I'm still learning, right? 5.5 weeks into the role, so I still have a lot to learn. I also have a lot to learn as a new CEO. But if I do take a look at where Draper is uniquely positioned again in this innovation ecosystem. And everyone wants to work with Draper, and the question is how do we scale, this organization, our processes, the organization, the tools with it, to really be able to tap into all the opportunities that we're surrounded by, such that our staff, whether it's technical staff or in finance contract, has a maximum amount of their day focused on innovation, versus hey, I got to fill out this report, and how do I fill out the report, and it's difficult. So I know that doesn't sound necessarily all that exciting, but there is a point here that I envy you all, because you guys get to actually go do real work and, in school. But, the reality is the CEO is more of an HR business process job, and these become the fun moments. But the reality is I've got to do everything I can to ensure that those, 1,800 employees can get their job done in an efficient manner, such that they have the ability to think, imagine, and create.
Is there like a follow-up question? Is there like a specific like innovation that when you like became a part of this company that like you wanted to see get done at some point, that maybe even still like isn't like on the way of happening there, but like you envision like the company like doing this really cool thing or something?
Yeah, I think that if I took each of those 4 blocks one at a time, I think the nation's already on a pretty good path here to recapitalize our strategic deterrence. I think we're at the tip of the iceberg of commercialization of space, right? We certainly have seen that in, small sats, and, I'm assuming that the Summer Institute still has the small sat project. But I think the commercialization of space to Moon and to Mars And Draper has an incredible opportunity to be a thought leader to support all those commercial companies with the know-how to get there and, if need be, back. For those that have been, seeing any of the news, this secure microelectronics arena is a big deal for our nation, not just for our critical infrastructure, but holistically for our national security posture. And there was a CHIPS Act that was recently published that will, address part of that gap. And Draper has a critical role in that going forward. And I'll be honest with you, when I came here, I was looking on why isn't Draper doing more in that electronic space as it links to to national security. And then finally, I already touched on, I had no idea about the biomedical security opportunities. Now that I'm here and I see what's going on, and this notion of bringing biologists and chemists together with engineers, right, and physicists, that doesn't exist in the commercial biomedical space, nor does that exist in the defense industrial base. And to me, I look at that and like, wow, now that you can see it and you understand, what's going on in the world, you look at that and say, wow, that is an amazing opportunity.
Thank you.
Great. Kai, how about you go next?
So first of all, thank you for giving us this talk. So my question is more of an opinion based. So do you think it's easier to go to the moon now here in like the 21st century or back when we did it in the Apollo program?
Great question. And I think it depends upon your viewpoint. Back in the Apollo program, President Kennedy in 1961 said, we're going to go to the moon this decade. And all of the national resources were put against doing that. Well, we don't have that unified view of going back to the moon. So it is, a different reason for going back to the moon, and it's going to be more commercially driven, right? Than, the original mission to the moon was a national security. What the United States did in putting that flag on the moon is they deemed the moon to be free to all. We did not claim it as sovereign U.S. soil. And that was an important point on why we had to be to the moon first, was to ensure that all people, right, had access to the moon. That's different today. Now, technology-wise, we are so much further. I mean, the fact that we had to be able to go from rooms full of vacuum tubes to literally a computer it was still big and heavy, bigger than your laptop, but something that big. We don't have that issue. We don't worry about compute power today. We got Falcon Heavies from SpaceX. We don't have to build the Saturn, right? And I don't think we could actually build it today if we tried. So there's all of these advantages we have today, 50 plus years after, right, Apollo 11 landing on the moon. That does make it easier. So it all depends upon the perspective that you look at, right? At the end of the day, if commercial is going to take off, there has to be a commercial viable reason on why to go to the moon. Small sats, it's there, and it's figured that. But I'm a firm believer. Leave it to commercial market forces, and they'll find a reason.
Just as a follow-up, like you mentioned how back in the 1960s, like there was a lot of national support and public support for like space in general. So how do you think like moving forward, we can like encourage the public to get more interested in these space programs and like commercialization of space?
Yeah, I think that and I'll go back to sort of what's going on in low Earth orbit and the commercialization there. And as you know, we got multiple companies now that you can, with enough money, go to space and back, briefly. That wasn't a public-driven decision. That was purely commercial. And so now NASA certainly helped by, making awards to some commercial, non-traditional defense companies to accelerate some of this, but then it took its life of its own. And, I think that NASA is going out of their way right now as well to do some of these commercial awards. So there is a commercial company that works with Draper for the landing back on the moon, and is a commercial, privately invested company to get there. It's a non-traditional defense contractor. So I think that there's a role to sort of demonstrate the what's achievable, but then at the end of the day, it'll all be driven by businesses saying, hey, there's a market opportunity and I want to go do that.
All right, thank you.
Derek, do you want to ask your question? And Jerry, if you want, we could unshare your screen and maybe see a few more of the faces, if that's okay. So Derek Kong?
Okay, yeah. So I know before you mentioned that, oh yeah, the top 10, most impressive, technological feats that we as humans have achieved. So what do you think are the next breakthroughs for humanity, and how how close do you think we are to, achieving those?
Yeah, well, I have no idea. I mean, that's the beauty of it is that until it's done, you're not sure. And we weren't sure we were going to make it to the moon. And there was a tremendous amount of risk to that. So I don't know. Now, if you hear, atomic physics, right, or quantum, right? You hear a lot of quantum, and there's a lot more than photonic entanglement that's going on in the quantum area. I wouldn't be surprised if something big happens in that area. I think the whole biology space, again, something, whether or not, there's the next Maxwell equation or Navier-Stokes equation or theory of relativity, I don't know, but you could absolutely see that. So it's tough to say, but that again goes back to, at the end of the day, what real world problem needs to be solved, and who's got, that ability to pull that cartoon together of something wild and crazy and pull it off. So, that's the best I can offer. But boy, if I knew, by the way, then that would definitely, I'd be making a lot of money. It's like if you knew who was going to win the World Series, right, in a year, or at the end of this season, right, you'd be a pretty cherished individual in this world.
Thank you.
Nathan, do you want to ask a question, and maybe don't limit specifically to MATLAB, but a little more broadly?
Okay. So you were talking about requirements for an internship, and I was wanting to know if there's any, because you were talking about like Python and about MATLAB and other things. What are some resources that we can do, and what can we do to prepare for these internships programs?
Yeah, I think that whether it's MATLAB or not, like it or not, what you're going through right now in the Summer Institute, like, pretty well qualifies you. So let's just make sure, right? You guys are all working projects. These are not easy projects. You're having to work as teams. You're having to use modern engineering tools to do that. For the for the most part, you're kind of already qualified. Okay. Right? So, but there is, pretty straightforward though. There are some basic, like Python, right? It's kind of an expectation, that, if you want to, get into that, into this area. By the way, it looks really, really good as well on your college application that you have, are already demonstrating these type of skills, right? Now, I'm a control estimation person, as you heard earlier, which means guides control. MATLAB is definitely one of the go-to tools that we use. But anything where you want to do simulations, mathematical modeling, there's others out there. But I would always encourage, if you go into engineering school, you're going to see MATLAB.
Okay.
And you can get a student's license very, very cheap for that if your high school doesn't already provide that for you.
Yeah, is there any way that you would recommend us learning how to use it?
That's the great thing. There is YouTube video after YouTube video. There's tutorials within MATLAB. There are so many resources that you can actually visually use to do that. It's quite amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Jerry, thanks so much for an outstanding talk. At this point, I'd like to invite a couple of the students. Malcolm and Mia, would you come on to thank our speaker, please?
Yeah, we'd just like to thank you so much for your presentation and all your wonderful insight on Draper Lab. Malcolm and I are actually part of the cyber operations course in BWSI. And it's just so fascinating how Draper is able to integrate so many engineering capabilities and develop solutions to all these far-reaching problems, all while being able to create a culture of an innovation ecosystem, as you phrased it.
And as students from the cyber operations course, we work with electronic systems, and secure processing is vital in the current climate, and that sort of exemplifies that, or our experience. And from the class of Cyber Ops Summer 2022, or CyBeavers, we'd like to present the BWSI shirt to you. So I'm gonna warp this over to you if you have it on hand. Screen.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you guys just hold them up and smile so Joel can get a picture?
Sure. Thank you again for supporting the program and walking us through the history of Draper Labs and the revolutionary technology being developed today.
Thank you all. And thank you for the t-shirt.
No problem.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry. And again, thank you for all of your support to BeaverWorks. We really appreciate it.
All right. Best wishes, everyone. Good luck this week.